You've heard it all before. America's booming economy, GDP on the rise, inflation under control. But what if everything you've been told about this so-called success is a lie? What if the recovery is a house of cards waiting to fall? The truth is, the US economy isn't some unstoppable juggernaut. It's a system built to look good on paper while the average person gets squeezed. We're talking about the real factors that are holding this country back: cheap inflation, insane healthcare costs, and a mountain of debt that's suffocating everyday Americans. Ready to face the truth? Let's get started. You've been told inflation is under control, right? But let's take a closer look at what that means for the average person. Sure, on paper, inflation might seem stable, but behind the scenes, there's a hidden economic beast no one's talking about. This is where cheap inflation comes into play. So, what exactly is cheap inflation? It's the not-so-innocent rise in the prices of low-cost, essential goods. While we hear about inflation slowing down or stabilizing, the things that regular Americans rely on are becoming significantly more expensive. The prices of essential goods have skyrocketed. From 2019 to 2023, USA food prices rose by 25%. The luxury items didn't face much rise. But don't be happy. This means that while luxury cars and expensive watches might seem slightly more affordable, the real burden is on the lower-income households that are already stretched thin by rent, groceries, and utilities. You see, the cost of necessities is climbing far faster than the price of non-essentials. And while the wealthy can absorb this, the poor are hit hardest, with their already limited disposable income disappearing into inflated prices. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a form of economic warfare, one that's designed to further widen the gap between the rich and the poor. Cheapflation is eroding the purchasing power of the average American. And what's worse is that the media and government officials are deliberately downplaying it. Let's not kid ourselves. While they tell us inflation is under control, it's only under control for those who don't have to care about the price of bread. The real question is, how long can this last before it destabilizes the entire economy? Because while cheap inflation hurts the average person, it's just one piece of a much bigger, more dangerous puzzle. The next piece of the puzzle is healthcare, and you won't like what you're about to hear. If you're paying attention to healthcare costs in the US, you already know this is a huge issue. We're told over and over again that the US healthcare system is the best in the world. But here's the dirty little secret. It's the most expensive and least effective. While they spend more than any other country, we're far from seeing the benefits that other nations enjoy. The healthcare sector is a massive chunk of GDP, but at the end of the day, it's more about inflating the numbers than about improving public health. Think about it. Healthcare accounts for 16% of the US GDP. That's right, a full 16%. That's more than any other developed country, and yet the health outcomes here are shockingly poor compared to countries that spend much less. While the government and media love to throw around the GDP growth numbers, they conveniently forget to mention that this growth comes from rising costs, not from improved health. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. How does this show up? Well, we all know how expensive it is to go to the doctor. The US spends so much on healthcare without getting better outcomes. People are being drained by medical bills, insurance premiums, and deductibles, money that could be going to savings or investment, but instead is being poured into a broken system. Medical debt is a leading cause of bankruptcy in the US, and millions of Americans delay necessary treatments because they simply can't afford the high costs. And yet, we're told that healthcare is an economic boon. But the truth? Healthcare isn't improving the economy. It's propping it up. It inflates GDP numbers while simultaneously bankrupting millions of Americans. The spending isn't translating into healthier people or a better quality of life. It's just paying the pockets of pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, and healthcare providers. This isn't success. This is a leech on the economy. And we've all been fed the lie that it's somehow beneficial. Other nations spend less on healthcare and have better outcomes. So why are we clinging to a system that is failing us financially and medically? The truth is, the US healthcare system isn't about health. It's about wealth. And as long as this cycle continues, we'll be stuck inflating GDP for a system that's actively hurting the people it's supposed to help. But while some people do mention healthcare, let's talk about something that's been swept under the rug for too long: debt. We've all heard the line that the US economy's growing because people are spending, right? Well, how are they spending? It's not with their savings or investments. It's by racking up debt. Americans are drowning in a sea of debt, and it's become the foundation for economic growth. Household debt has surged to nearly $18 trillion. Yes, you read that right. The average American household now carries around $104,215 in debt. Mortgages, student loans, credit cards, you name it. The government loves to tout GDP growth as a sign of success, but that growth is fueled by borrowed money. And you can't build an economy on borrowing forever. Eventually, that debt has to be paid off. But here's the truth: it won't be. This growing mountain of debt isn't the sign of a thriving economy. It's the sign of a nation that's living beyond its means. You see, debt-driven growth looks great in the short term. It boosts consumption and inflates GDP numbers. But what happens when those bills come due? What happens when credit cards are maxed out, student loans can't be paid, and mortgages become too much to handle? We're living on borrowed time, and this debt bubble is going to burst. It's a house of cards, and the first gust of wind will bring it all down. What's even scarier is that this debt isn't just a financial issue. It's a generational issue. Millennials and Gen Z are already saddled with debt they can't escape. And instead of using their money for investments, savings, or growth, they're stuck paying off the interest. This is a financial treadmill. No matter how fast you run, you're going nowhere. The debt bubble is not just unsustainable. It's a ticking time bomb waiting to blow up the economy. Now it all comes full circle. You thought the debt problem was just something that regular Americans were dealing with, right? Think again. The US government is no better. The federal deficit has surpassed $2 trillion, which is about 7% of GDP. And guess what? It's all borrowed money. The government is playing the same game as the people, borrowing its way into economic growth. But this is dangerous. What does all this government borrowing do? It inflates GDP and makes the economy look like it's growing. But in reality, it's borrowing from the future to fund today's spending. This isn't a sign of economic strength. It's a red flag. What happens when interest rates rise or a recession hits? The government will struggle to pay its debt, and the entire economy will feel the repercussions. Let's talk about where this borrowing is going. The US government spends a disproportionate amount on military and defense. While defense contractors make billions, there's little to show for the average citizen. Instead of investing in healthcare, education, or infrastructure, the US is building an empire that serves the rich, leaving the rest of the population to foot the bill. The government's spending isn't helping the average American. It's enriching the already wealthy. While on paper it is said that the US's economy is doing good, then why do so many Americans feel like the economy is failing them, even when the numbers look good? The answer is simple. The system is rigged. Politicians, media outlets, and economists may tell you everything's great, but the people know better. Rising healthcare costs, skyrocketing debt, and cheap inflation are making life harder for the average person, and the wealthiest are the only ones benefiting. When politicians and the media tell us the economy is doing fine, it's easy to forget that most of those economic gains aren't being shared. GDP numbers look good on paper, but that doesn't reflect the reality of everyday Americans. People are working harder than ever. But they're seeing less of the reward. And when the economy is doing well, they're still struggling to make ends meet. That's why the numbers don't match the reality on the ground. The real question is, what happens when it all collapses? The US has borrowed its way to prosperity, and one day the bill will come due. Let us know in the comment section. Will the US be ready for it? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, the economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.